Dr. Betsy Greenleaf, and we're here with another episode. I'm so excited that we're going to be speaking with Dr. Susan Fox today. Thank you so much, Susan, for taking the time to speak with us.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Betsy, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Can you explain to the listeners what is it that you do?
Certainly. So I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And what I do more specifically is I work with women's health with a focus in fertility. I don't use the word infertility. I have a focus in fertility. And then obviously it morphs into maternal health, emotional health, and all of the spectrum that a woman's health encompasses.
I find the Asian and the Eastern medicine is so much more like advanced. I mean, it's been around for a lot longer than traditional Western medicine.
5,000 years.
And the funny thing is, still in America, I think we're finally coming around to accepting it, but it was for a very long time looked at as very kind of like woo, like out there. But when in
Right.
fact, it really has more to do with how the body is working than Western medicine.
Exactly. So whereas Western medicine is reductionist and will take you down to what pill do you need for this, uh, Asian medicines, Eastern medicines, traditional medicines are more observational and say, what pattern is your problem following? So we can sort of unwind that pattern and get you back into a sense of balance with nature, since we are one with nature. So it really does have a bit of a woo to it, for the science-based, thinker and community. And yet it also has an innate, how shall I say, it has an innate understanding and of when we're listening to, oh yeah, that's me. That's how I operate in the world. I'm really a carbon-based being, so it makes sense that I would have seasons and and have movement in my life.
And what do you mean by seasons?
Right. So when we have seasons from birth to death, right? We have, and in Chinese medicine, actually will say that a woman has her seasons, if you will, in a series of 7 years. So at age 7, she's, lost her baby teeth and is now becoming sort of a prepubescent. By age 14, back in the ancient days, at this point, she is ready to bear children. She's begun her menstruation. By age, where am I at? By age 21, she's ripe. And then by age 28 to in her 30s, it's starting to wane. And so that hasn't changed in our bodies and, in our functionality. Our lifestyle has changed. So we are busy in a modern society trying to pull back the clock, if you will, so that we're having our babies in our 30s to 40s as though we were in our early 20s. And our fast-paced life is causing us to suffer some of the consequences of what otherwise might have been a natural evolution into a perimenopausal, menopausal lifestyle, where we would say the energies that once were in our gonads, to reproduce, are now up in our heart region, in our mind, so that we can be the wisdom keepers and wisdom tellers.
I was thinking from a traditional standpoint, and even in my own life, I remember when I was younger, there was so much effort in not to get pregnant. And then all of a sudden you think, okay, now it's time to get pregnant. This should happen like immediately because I spent all that time and energy not to. Once I come off birth control, it should automatically happen. And I think I'm not the only person that's been in that boat.
So. No, regrettably, and sometimes, excuse me, sometimes that is because we have not been taught about what is our physiology, what is our menstrual physiology. Let me turn this phone off so I'm not getting dings. Excuse me. So we consider ourselves lucky if we miss a period and we're not pregnant or miss several periods. Like, whoo, I don't have to worry about that. Not thinking that is a sign that there might be something going on for us metabolically and reproductively.
From the Asian standpoint, is there another, like when we think about Western medicine, we're thinking usually like, oh, infertility is like it's a hormone thing, or the ovaries are starting to kind of get tired. What is it from a traditional Chinese standpoint and I'm sure there's more
Well,
than
it's a
one.
lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. Yeah. I would so exactly. We look at it from 5 elements and meridian theory and organ theory. But I would say, whereas we might in Western medicine get a diagnosis of PCOS or something like that, polycystic ovaries, and that's the cause for a fertility challenge. In the Chinese medicine model, we would say, well, we don't really care about the word PCOS, like what's happening metabolically to create this, what we would refer to as a damp phlegm accumulation, because these follicles are just sort of hanging around in the ovary, getting in the way of the next set of follicles being recruited to ovulation. So we look at it that way and say, okay, and then therefore, some of it's predisposition, genetic predisposition, but some of it is more of it is lifestyle. So, what are you doing or not doing? Are you moving your body, first thing in the morning? So we have different language, but it's very much the same pillars as we use in functional integrative medicine, right? Are you getting nutrients to all of your tissues? Because all of your tissues include your ovaries and uterus and follicles. Are we well hydrated? Are we getting ample sleep for detoxification? So I think I answered your question. I'm not quite sure if I did.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
definitely. And I was going to ask too, like for couples that are finding themselves in this position of, having a challenge with fertility. And I like the fact that you don't call it infertility, that it's, more of a, kind of
Yeah.
like an issue with, or, it's more that you work with fertility.
Well, exactly. If I were to use the Western language, I would say subfertility, right? There is something impeding fertility, but really an infertile woman, in order to be infertile, needs to have no follicles, or, an inability for sperm to meet egg somewhere in the connecting channels. But usually that's not the case. There are, regardless of the diagnosis, I mean, sperm can meet egg. There are just factors, lifestyle factors, and health factors that are getting in the way. Even for men, I mean, it could be a varicocele, but we would call that a stagnation of blood, because obviously a varicose vein is a stagnation of blood. So we would use, herbs or supplements to help clear, the 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 varicosities that he might be suffering from.
I was going to say, from a lifestyle standpoint, what is it that we're doing in American culture that is affecting our
Mm.
fertility?
Boy, it's several things, right? And kind of guilty as charged. I can speak to myself as an audience of one. We are not well hydrated. That's probably one of the first things that I realize, is that we think we're hydrated because we're taking in fluids, but we're not actually taking in the water and electrolytes to clean ourselves and to nourish ourselves so that they can actually function properly. And we tend to kind of grab and go, whether it is a coffee in the morning, a bagel on the way, even if we're grabbing and going with something that might otherwise seem and sound healthy, like an egg bite that we might have even made the night before. The very fact of grabbing and going impedes our ability to digest properly and to assimilate those nutrients, and then therefore eliminate wastes properly. So it's really, and of course sleep. We are addicted to our tablets and our devices, and we're watching Netflix until it's time to go to sleep, thinking that great, I hit the pillow, I fall asleep, but then we don't realize, well, we're waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, because we're still at the effect of all of that light infusion that we had bombarded ourselves with up until 11 o'clock, when we decided to roll into bed.
Unfortunately, I am definitely guilty of that. Like will turn off all the computers and all the electronics, but I can't break myself away from that Netflix. That's a tough one, especially when you're like binge watching. You're like, "Wait,
It
one more,
is.
one
It is.
more."
Right. It is a tough one. As I say, I sometimes hear myself speak, and I think I'm preaching to hear myself speak. But
Oh my.
it's one of those things where, and I say this all the time, it's easy, but not easy. I mean, these solutions are not complex. They're not, they're lifestyle solutions. And usually we have to bump up against, something that's not working in order to make it worth our while to make those changes. So, if fertility pregnancy isn't happening, then there's enough cause to say, okay, then maybe I will go to bed at 10:30 to be asleep by 11 o'clock rather than binge watch until 11 or 11:30, even though I know, I mean, here again, Chinese medicine and traditional medicines, there is an innate knowing, like we know that if we did not have our lights and devices, we'd probably be sound asleep at dark o'clock.
And I can't wait to find out more about this when we come back from the commercial break.
Okay.
80% of women will develop a pelvic health condition at some point in their lives. There is relief. There is hope. The Pelvic Floor Store, your resource for personal health.
And we're back with Dr. Susan Fox. So, Susan, this is so incredibly interesting. I actually wanted to ask you about meridians because you hear about this a lot in Chinese medicine, and I've seen the charts and they have the little dots all over. But can you explain what exactly is this concept of meridians?
Sure. Well, they are energy pathways is the simplest way to describe it. And they were mapped out thousands of years ago. And what's interesting is that we now can use science and have used science to prove either the muscle conductivity or the nerve conductivity or the circulatory system through these meridians. And so we have meridians that will help treat certain, we call organ systems. So when I say an organ system, if I'm talking about the liver, it includes the liver as we understand it in Western medicine, but it's much more than that. It's a system that also includes our tendency toward saying, yes, I want to do that. It's our creative potential. If I talk about the kidney system, it includes our kidneys as the devices that cleanse our blood, but it also includes our hormones. So these meridian pathways, that's the acupuncture portion of traditional Chinese medicine anyway, were mapped out usually by what was called sure points initially. So that somebody would press in a point and someone would say, I feel that's having a certain effect. And as I was taught, a lot of times the doctor and the patient that were identifying these meridians were either blind or had other kinds of disabilities, so that their sense of touch and receptivity to touch was heightened, and they could really kind of hone in on, oh yes, when you press on between my first and second toe, I actually feel a release of energy where I might have otherwise felt tension or frustration. I can actually feel it let go. So we use that point now with needles if somebody's having a little bit of agitation, PMS, road rage.
And what causes the stagnation of this energy flow through the body? And that's probably like a loaded question.
Well, it's a little bit of a loaded question, but it's once again, it's impedance to lifestyle. If we're supposed to get up and go through our day in harmony and in communication, but we find ourselves, looking at our Google calendar and we've got something to do every half hour, you can almost feel the breath holding that takes place with that, right? So that's a stagnation. We're not breathing easily and comfortably. Translate that to Western medicine, we're then also in our sympathetic fight or flight. We're not resting, digesting, detoxifying along the way. So that is a stagnation. If we injure ourselves and get a bruise, that's a stagnation because it's an impedance of the blood flow. If we are running too much cortisol, stress hormone, it's going to get in the way and start stealing from other hormones from the hormonal chain. And that's going to cause a stagnation that will, here again, like sometimes lead to something like a PCOS, because the PCOS is a stagnation of the ability for those follicles to go back into artresia when one of them has ovulated. That's what we're supposed to do, is digest the rest of those follicles that didn't make it to ovulation. But there's enough of an impedance metabolically that will say, oh, well, we're just going to hang out here. And that's where they see that string of pearls in the ovary, and they're secreting low levels of hormones that then interrupt the rest of the hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian communication axis, so that there's more stagnation. Stagnation breeds more stagnation unless we get in there and make some changes.
We've been focusing on fertility, but stress in any way, like anytime you have a medical condition or if your body's not going the way you want it to, like, in this case, you want to have a baby and it's not working, but, there are other conditions where you're not
Sure.
functioning in the way that you want to. How can that stress now affect the body?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to answer the question a little bit with a chicken and the egg. The answer is it will affect the body, right? But what we do is to say where and how is it affecting the body? How are your emotions showing up? If your emotions are showing up where you have a stressor and your response is to go into maybe the party girl, everything's fine, nothing's wrong kind of mode, then we would say that's affecting what we call your shen, your heart organ system, your spirit. If your response is to get just PO'd and take it out on the dog or something, we would say that's affecting the liver system, because here again, that liver wants to just flow and generate and create, and it's been impeded. So all that really great energy is kind of like having your foot on the gas pedal, pardon me, your foot on the brake, or the foot on the gas pedal and the car's in park. So you're running the engine, but you're not going anywhere, kind of thing. If your response to stress is to sort of feel grief stricken, then we would say that's a function of the lung system, and we would look to see, are you also having maybe skin irritations or rashes or eczema or hives or something like that, or are you having actual lung issues where you're prone to colds and allergies and things like that. So we look to the symptom to help us track back to the organ system that's deficient, and then we work with that organ system to get it back into balance.
And I've heard this before, and I don't know if it's true. Is it true that in Chinese medicine, a lot of times you guys assess and look at the tongue? Because we don't
Yes.
hardly ever look at the tongue in traditional medicine
Yeah.
unless someone's having a problem.
Right. No, we definitely look at the tongue. We look at the tongue coat, we look at the tongue color, and we look at the tongue shape and size. Our tongue is supposed to be a rosy pink color. It's supposed to have a thin white coat on it, and it's supposed to fit in our mouth and not be oversized such that we have teeth marks in it. If it is having any of those things, for instance, if we're catching a cold, we can look at in the mirror and see, oh yeah, my tongue coat is a little thick. It's a little white or it's a little yellow. It means we're fighting an infection, and that shows up on the tongue. If the tongue it has lost some of its coat, we would call that a fluid deficiency. We call it a yin deficiency. And so we would know that we need to replenish those fluids, because it's not good to be without fluids. If the tongue is too fat in the mouth and we see teeth marks, we would say, okay, that tongue is telling us that this person is not metabolizing well. She's not actually,
Seen that on patients.
Yeah. She's not taking in her fluid. She's not eliminating her waste well, and it's showing up with this sort of almost fluid accumulation in her tongue.
That is really fascinating, because
Yeah.
I've seen that in patients. I've always wondered, like, because we don't have an explanation of that in traditional medicine. Because I've looked before, because I've seen that in
Yeah.
patients. I'm like, why is that? That is
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
fascinating.
We also look under the tongue at the frenulum, because sometimes those veins can be engorged, and that will tell us that there is some stagnation, blood stagnation somewhere in the body. So that can lead us to ask more questions about, do you have a back injury or a neck injury, or was there any history of injury that hasn't been addressed?
When do you recommend somebody should seek out care with with an Eastern medicine doctor?
Well, I'm very biased, so
Yeah.
I would say today. And the reason being is that in Chinese medicine, our goal is to not have to have patients, right? Our goal is to be able to just function, with maintenance, so that we're, going from birth to death without that many bumps in the road. And so if we wait until we have a symptom or a diagnosis, then there's a lot of unraveling that needs to occur in order for us to improve those symptoms or those signs.
So this is wonderful. Where can people find out more information about you?
So I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I have a brick and mortar practice in the North Bay, just across the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's drsusanfox.com. And that's probably the best way to get started with me. There will be other ways to get started with me, or through social media, through the Dr. Susan Fox handle. But for the most part, right now, it's easier to get through to me through the drsusanfox.com website. And then, you can call me, you can email me, and I'll let you know what's coming down the pike, because I do have more ways to get in touch with me in the near future.
Oh, this is so exciting. Thank you,
Thank
Susan, for
you.
taking the time to speak with us. And so I'm
Thank you,
just going to
Dr. Betsy.
remind everybody to check out Dr. Susan's website. Also, while you're there, go check out drbetsygreenleaf.com and my social
Yes.
media in any forums. And don't forget to tune in for another episode next week. So once again, Dr. Susan, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Dr. Betsy. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.